Today we're covering 3 final photos with the most chilling backstories I could find. And I have to warn you that the last moments of the people in these pictures only get more disturbing as we go. When David Alexander Johnston turned his passion in geology into a career, he had no idea that the very thing he loved most would lead him straight into an absolute nightmare, which ended in his doom. By 1978, David had earned a PhD in the field and joined the United States Geological Survey, working mostly out of the Pacific Northwest, where he could monitor volcanic emission levels. So when earthquakes began to shake Mount St. Helens on March 16, 1980, David springs into action, as he knew that there was always a possibility that there could be an eruption after the quakes. David drops everything and rushes to the then dormant volcano, even taking the time to escort interested reporters to a place nearby. In fact, he was actually the first geologist on the volcano. Though he is more excited than he has been in a long time, he is wholly unprepared for what is about to happen. On the afternoon of March 17th, David is at an observation post just outside an area deemed the Red Zone, with his field assistant Harry. Harry and David are cracking jokes and excitedly discussing the possibility of what is before them. But as the evening begins to loom over the two men, David makes an executive decision to send Harry on his way for the night, saying that he'll cover his post instead. Perhaps David could feel something that no one else could, or perhaps it all comes down to the fact that David is just so excited that he simply can't make himself leave. Either way, Harry agrees to follow David's orders. But just before Harry leaves, he turns toward David, yells for him to say cheese, and snaps his photo. It's the perfect shot, as you can see. His casual demeanor and excitement can almost be felt through the picture as David smiles at the camera. Little did David or Harry know, this photograph would be the last picture of David ever taken. While he's on his own during the evening, David starts to grow frustrated. He knows that looking at gas emissions is an important part of understanding the nature of volcanic activity, but he just can't seem to find the levels that he'd been expecting. You see, in 1980, the science surrounding volcanic studies was extremely limited, as the subject itself was so new. And that is exactly why no one on David's team knows the reason emission levels are off. At the same time that David is monitoring everything from the ground, the inside of the volcano is actually completely waterlogged after years of inactivity. By the time the next morning rolls around, David knows that anything could happen, even if the volcano has been dormant for over 100 years. Based on his analysis, it's likely nothing will even occur, although he continues to tell his friends and colleagues that the whole volcano is a dynamite keg with the fuse lit. But then again, there aren't any distinct changes in the data he's looking over that says whether or not something, if anything, is going to happen. Armed with his trusty binoculars, David spends hours looking over the volcano, hoping there will be some kind of sign that there would be an eruption, so that he could alert his friends and his team in time. He's not too worried though, as most volcanic activity could be determined hours or even days in advance. Except the waterlogged volcano makes it almost impossible to determine anything, let alone a specific time that the whole thing would erupt. Which is why David nearly falls out of his seat when he sees it. There in the distance, Mount St. Helens is alive and angry. David's whole world stands still for a second, and then everything happens all at once. As lava is launched into the air before him, David grabs his handheld radio and shouts, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it." Those few excited and fearless words turned out to be David's last, and Vancouver never even heard them. His last words, that he had hoped would have been transmitted clearly, were quickly whisked away with David himself, as the eruption from Mount St. Helens quite literally blew him off of the ridge he had been perched on. His final radio transmission was only ever picked up by a ham radio operator who had managed to record those words, as the eruption itself had interfered with their transmission. That same radio operator attempted to relay the message and re-establish contact with the excited voice on the other end of the line. But Dr. David Johnston never responded. 57 people died in the eruption, and though some campers and scientists around Mount St. Helens managed to escape and survive the eruption, David was not among them. In fact, his body was never even recovered from the scene of the eruption, though bits and pieces of his remains have been discovered over the years. And to think that just 13 hours before his death, he had been smiling and excited, as seen in the last photo that anyone would ever take of him. But you know, if I were David's family, I think I would really cherish this last piece of David, especially if I never got to say goodbye. 25-year-old Anne Faber of the Netherlands was a creative, artistic type with dreams of one day becoming the director of the Rijksmuseum. But in her free time, she loved embarking on outdoor adventures with her boyfriend. Unfortunately, not all adventures turn out the way you hope. If you're someone who enjoys going out into the woods by yourself, I'll just say, watch this one at your own discretion. Because after learning about this case, you might find yourself looking over your shoulder to make sure you're really alone. On September 29, 2017, Anne sets out on a bike ride alone after her boyfriend says he's too busy to tag along. Instead of being discouraged by his absence in the cloudy sky, Anne decides to make the most of the time to herself. She grabs her bicycle from her garage, takes a raincoat just in case, and heads out, eventually making her way through the forests and deciding to head towards a small village nearby called Den Dolder. She's hungry at this point and can't wait to grab a bite in town. But just as she starts to pedal in that direction, Anne is shocked by the sudden, forceful downpour of rain. Sure, the sky had been rather cloudy, but she hadn't really thought that it was going to rain. This definitely puts a damper on her plans, no pun intended, and she briefly debates whether or not she should continue on her way into Den Dolder or head back toward the warmth of her home. As she tries to make a decision, Anne takes out her cell phone and, seeing the humor in her situation, she decides to take a quick selfie to capture the ridiculous downpour in the moment. In the photo, Anne is seen giving her best peace sign while making a rather exasperated expression as she is violently pelted with raindrops. Her rain jacket is soaked, her socks are wet, and her hair is beyond drenched. She laughs briefly at the way she looks in the photo before sending it to her boyfriend to show him what he's missing. She slips her phone back into her pocket around 6:50 p.m. Unfortunately, that photo was the last picture anyone would ever take of Anne Faber. Anne slides back into her bike and sets off down one of the nearby roads, and as she does so, she has no idea that she's not alone. That is, until she is quite literally run into by a man on a scooter. Anne brushes herself off and starts to say, "My bad, I guess I spaced out and didn't see where I was going for a sec there." But just as she's first able to look the man in the eyes, she notices something peculiar. The man is wearing a jumpsuit, but not just any jumpsuit. The same kind of jumpsuit that psychiatric patients wore in the Netherlands when they were undergoing treatment. Before she has time to react, the man reaches out and grabs her. Even though she gives no sign that she's about to call for help, he grabs her cell phone out of her hand and throws it to the ground. When he's sure that Anne's phone is useless, he then grabs Anne by the wrists and pulls her close to him. Covering her mouth the entire time, he manages to pull Anne all the way over to a nearby wooded area, where he assaults her. When he's finished, Anne is in a lot of pain, but just then she hears someone jogging by. She's thinking, maybe I can be saved if I can just get their attention. And acting on instinct, she starts to cry out for the jogger. Except the second she opens her mouth, her captor slits her throat with a knife. The poor girl who had been so goofy and good-natured on her rainy day adventure just moments before was dead. The man buries Anne's body under the leaves in the woods, and he leaves her there until the next morning. And then when he's able to get his hands on his mom's car, he comes back and shoves her body into the car. He then drives to his hometown that's around 35 minutes away, and when he's there, he cleans Anne's body with chlorine and takes her into the backyard to bury her in a shallow grave. To further rid himself of the evidence, he disposes of Anne's coat, bicycle, and backpack in 3 different areas around Zeewold and Soest. When Anne never returns home from her bike ride, her family freaks out and calls to report her missing. Days start to go by and there's still no sign of Anne anywhere. Her boyfriend cannot believe what's happening because Anne had just texted him hours before anyone had known that she was missing. Something just wasn't adding up. And then investigators found Anne's raincoat on October 3rd and her bicycle on October 5th, and finally her backpack on October 6th. That's when it became abundantly clear that something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. Investigators sent in Anne's coat for DNA testing and found that a match came back for a 27-year-old man named Michael Panhuis. Sure enough, at the time of Anne's death, Michael had been a patient at a psychiatric facility in Dendolder Village, where he received ongoing treatment for his drug addiction. Oh, and did I mention that he's a convicted sex offender? Yeah, in 2010, he brutally assaulted 2 teenage girls and was subsequently sentenced to 11 years in prison. After serving his time in prison, he ended up in the very same psychiatric facility that led him to Anne. You see, convicted sex offenders in the Netherlands are required to have constant supervision while outside of any psychiatric facilities they are currently receiving treatment from. Except due to privacy laws, Michael was actually allowed to withhold the fact that he was a convicted sex offender at the time. So, no one at that facility actually knew that he needed to be watched over, nor did they know what he was capable of doing. On March 9th, Michael was arrested and charged with Anne's murder after his DNA was found on her belongings. Just days later, Michael openly confessed to brutally assaulting and killing Anne Faber, and then he led investigators to her body. At his trial, Michael acted like he had not intended to murder Anne when he had killed her. He claims to have gone out to refuel his scooter while carrying a variety of sharp objects. Because he claims that Anne's death was not premeditated and that he only killed her because she screamed out for help, like that makes it any better, the prosecution could not prove that he had planned to kill her in advance. And because murder in the Netherlands is defined as the intentional or premeditated killing of another person, Michael was convicted of qualified manslaughter instead and sentenced to 28 years in prison. Now, the only thing Anne's friends and family have left of her is the memories she made with them and that final photo she'd taken of herself. Have you ever had someone obsessed with you to the point it made you afraid? Our last case is the most disturbing yet, not only because of how utterly horrific it is, but also because it goes to show that sometimes the people you know can be far scarier than any stranger. Jolee Callan was a sweet young girl from Alabama. She was well loved by family and friends alike, though no one claimed to love her more than her boyfriend, Lauren Bunner. Well, her ex-boyfriend, though he didn't like to see it that way. Lauren was 2 years older than Jolee and was extremely possessive when they were together. According to friends of Lauren and Jolee, Lauren wanted Jolee to spend time with him and his friends only, and would get jealous if Jolee didn't listen to him. All of Jolee's attempts to break up with Lauren were unsuccessful because he emotionally manipulated her into staying with him every single time. You see, every time Jolee would suggest a breakup, Lauren would threaten to take his own life if she went through with it. Yeah, toxic is an understatement. Finally, at some point, Jolee managed to break things off pretty peacefully, which was surprising. So, Jolee was freshly 18 years old in 2014, when she had finally gotten over the relationship with Lauren. Jolee actually ended up dating a new guy who treated her far, far better than she had ever been treated before. And of course, Lauren absolutely hated that. So just a few weeks before Jolee was set to head off to college, Lauren gave her a call because he wanted to be able to say goodbye to her before she left. Though they had been separated, the two were still friends. Jolee appreciated Lauren's gesture and figured that there was no harm in saying goodbye. Besides, she did kinda want some actual closure. Jolee accepted Lauren's offer to go hiking as just friends on August 30th, 2015. The night before the hike, Jolee had been texting one of her best friends, updating her on the drama of it all when she jokingly told her friend to be wary if something happens to her in the morning, because she would be with Lauren. If only Jolee had taken her own joke seriously. The next day, Jolee and Lauren meet up at Chehaw State Park in the Alabama countryside. Jolee brings her pup Kiba and heads over to the Panhuis Trail to set out on a hike she's almost nervous about going on. Throughout the majority of the hike, the two talk about their time as a couple and reminisce over the times that were good, rather than dwell on the negative parts of the past. So throughout the course of the hike, Lauren is acting normal. He cracks jokes as he always does and makes sure to take a few photos of Jolee, which he ends up posting on Instagram. Among the photos that Lauren takes of Jolee is one where she is facing the forest. With her back to Lauren, Jolee may not have been aware of the fact that her photo is being taken. Jolee definitely doesn't know that this photo will be the last photo taken of her alive. Just moments after Lauren snaps this picture of Jolee, he posts it on his Instagram like all of the others. And then, everything changes. And if you're sensitive to violence, this is your last chance to turn back. Jolee finishes taking pictures of the trees around them on her phone, and so she turns back toward Lauren, who is waiting patiently for her. That's when he does the unthinkable. There on the cliffside, Lauren pulls a gun out of the waistband of his jeans. Lauren fires a single bullet into the back of Jolee's head. Jolee abruptly collapses. Lauren flips her rigid body over, and then he fires one more shot without hesitation, right between Jolee's eyes. And it doesn't stop there. Lauren then lifts up the body of his now deceased ex-girlfriend and chucks her corpse over the side of the cliff she had just been looking out over moments before. After this, he's calm, cool, and far more collected than any person should be after brutally executing their ex-girlfriend. Lauren makes his way back to his truck. He sits down in the driver's seat, pulls out his phone, still filled with photos of the young woman he just shot, and dials 911. Lauren turns himself in by telling the 911 operator that he just killed his ex-girlfriend. Officers were quick to arrive at the scene, where they found Lauren absolutely covered in Jolee's blood. Lauren was subsequently arrested and charged with Jolee's murder before telling officers where Jolee's body was. At his trial in November of 2015, Lauren tried to claim that he and Jolee had a murder-suicide pact, but he had been too scared to follow through with his end of the bargain. But nobody was really buying that weird excuse. I mean, they weren't even dating at this point. What in the world would drive Jolee to make such a strange promise, and with him of all people? Well, by July of 2017, the court finally decided that Lauren was guilty of murdering Jolee Callan, despite Lauren's attorney's pleas for leniency on the basis of Lauren's mental illness. Lauren was sentenced as an adult to serve 52 years in prison, though he would be eligible for parole after serving his first 15 years. Jolee's family is still trying to come to terms with their daughter's sudden, violent death. I think this photo is the saddest in a way, because while the first one was captured by a good friend, and the second by a girl herself just enjoying her day, this one was taken by a demented killer who was about to take a beautiful soul out of the world. Out of what? Some sixth sense of ownership.